Yeah. Good evening, everybody. My name is Milan Scheidecker. Pleasure to welcome you to the Frontiers of Psychedelic Science this semester. I'm co-organizing this lecture together with Helena Eicher, and we are pleased to offer you a quite multidisciplinary program this semester. We have one artist and two scientists here presenting, or therapists/scientists. And we will be focusing on three different medicinal herbs, actually. Today, Iboga. Next time, psilocybin. We will visit the film, The Mushroom Speaks. And the third talk will be most likely about ayahuasca, to be confirmed. But yeah. So the goal of this forum is to create a transdisciplinary platform to allow for a dialogue between scientists, therapists, philosophers, cultural scientists, artists on the topic of altered states of consciousness, both induced through psychoactive substances, but also through other methods, actually. I'm very curious about the talk today because there is a lot of rumors about microdosing and potential efficacy and all the anecdotes that are out there. Systematic controlled trials are still lacking, but I think it's a very worthwhile topic to have a deeper look into it and explore the potential benefits. I'm also curious to learn more about how African tribes used Iboga or already knew about potential microdosing effects, and I'm very glad that Tobias Erni actually will speak tonight. You are very knowledgeable about Iboga. You're active as a networker, as a facilitator, as a consultant, and a speaker. You wrote a German language standard on Iboga, actually, a reference work, and you serve as the executive director and board member for the Global Iboga Therapy Alliance and also collaborate with the Beckley Foundation in Oxford. In his talk, Tobias will shed light on the mechanism of action of Iboga and also how it could be beneficial for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And what's also quite impressive, and not sure if it's the scope of the talk today, but maybe of the discussion, you also mentioned that you are very active on the ground in villages and tribes in Gabon to preserve the cultural heritage of the Bwiti and also the sustainable sourcing of Iboga alkaloids, which is, I guess, also a huge controversial topic. Yeah. So I'm glad that you joined this series. I'm very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you.
Just for your information, this lecture will be recorded, and if the speaker agrees, we will also share it on social media and networks, just that you're informed in case you ask questions, but we can cut also questions out if you don't want to be included in the discussion.
Not want to be on the picture, then just sit on the side.
Can you hear me? Is the microphone on? Yeah? Okay. So for some of us, including me, Iboga is an outstandingly interesting plant. Why is this so? What is the fascination of this entheogen with an almost peculiar reputation? In the next hour or so, I will try to convey this fascination. Iboga is most likely known since the dawn of mankind or human consciousness. And it is endemic to the deep jungles of equatorial Africa, not so far away from the supposed cradle of mankind, the Rift Valley. So some people believe that the first humanoids, or all of our great-grand ancestors, come from the Rift Valley. And there, a little fun fact on the side: the supposedly oldest skeleton of an upright walking humanoid, some 3 million years old, is called Lucy. And while catalogizing the bones in 1974, The discoverers, Donald Johanson and his postdoc Tom Gray, loved to listen to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds from the Beatles. So basically the first humanoid skeleton we know of is named after LSD. But back to the jungles of Africa. Rainforests are in general phytotherapeutic treasure chests with an enormously high density of biodiversity, and we are not even close to have mapped all of it. So one of these treasures with massive healing potential, psychological as well as physiological, is Iboga. And a common approach with Iboga are so-called flood doses. So flood doses are called flood doses because that is what basically happens. The brain, the body gets flooded with substantial doses of Iboga alkaloids. So these flood doses are super potent catalysts for healing due to their profound quality of transmitting psycho-spiritual insights, as well as their pharmacological ability to restructure the brain. So floods are pretty high doses, very intensive, potentially lethal, and several days lasting near-death experiences. And because of the potential dangers, the intensity, the time involved, as well as the high costs, these high-dosed experiences tend not to be very appealing for common people. So outside of Africa, Iboga gained its fame for the ability to interrupt drug addiction rather quick and painless, especially opiate dependency. So basically, until not so long ago, Iboga was thought after either by addicts who want to get rid of their problems and change their lives, or also sometimes by psycho-spiritual hardcore explorers that want to explore the outskirts of infinity. For people who are not deeply involved with pharmacological base jumping or shamasochistic practices, it is not necessarily the first choice of spending their free days. But there is much more to Iboga than these floods. There's a wide variety of beneficial and healing effects accessible with micro and mini doses. And that's what we want to explore tonight. I will shed some light on the different possibilities of application. But first, I want to explore a bit the tradition and history of microdosing of Iboga and Ibogaine also. So the origins of taking Iboga in high doses as well as in low doses are found with the Pygmy tribes who inspired the Bwiti traditions of the Misoko and the Fang in western equatorial Africa. For them, the root bark of the shrub is kind of an herbal multi-tool. You could say some kind of naturopathic leatherman. It is used as medicine, as aphrodisiac, as stimulant, as well as catalyst for spiritual initiations. So these spiritual initiations, which are the so-called flood doses, are several days to weeks lasting rites which mark the initiation into adulthood or also into the spiritual dimensions. So traditionally, these are very high-dosed experiences, near-death experiences, and they say the astral body detaches from the physical body, and the spirit of the initiates wanders the astral realms, meets with dead ancestors, and experiences the spiritual nature of cosmos firsthand. Bwitis say that one who has seen and experienced it has no need to believe anymore because it is just knowledge. And by this, one becomes a full member of the tribe. This is really fascinating stuff, and you could basically spend a lifetime exploring the astral realms, but it's not today's topic. So besides these pretty intense initiations, smaller doses are used for a wide variety of applications. For example, in case of toothache, they chew on the root bark and it numbs the mouth. So basically you could say it's a soft local anesthetic. And then also during hunting, low doses of Iboga are eaten, and it basically sharpens the senses. They see better, they hear better, they have also an increased stamina, they can go hunting longer, and also it centers and grounds oneself. And furthermore, it suppresses hunger and thirst. So they can basically go stalking for days and have a higher success with hunting. And then also small amounts are used as a potent aphrodisiac. And also for heavy labor, microdoses are eaten to strengthen and increase the stamina. Usually, in the old days, the European colonists were quite brutal with suppressing the indigenous rights or religions, but the Germans actually allowed the tribes there to eat Iboga while building the railroad from Douala to Yaoundé, because in South Cameroon, because they saw how the people worked harder, stronger and longer, of which Germans are naturally very fond of. And then the anthropologists, Professor James Fernandez, described in his book how remarkably and outstandingly happy pygmy tribes taught the use of Iboga to the ethnic group of the Fang, which somehow indicates there must be a beneficial effect on the mood. Here we see the book of Professor Fernandez and himself with a very ridiculous hat, which seems to indicate his alpha male status. And then furthermore, initiated puitis, this means someone who has had a large dose, use smaller doses in regular ceremonies to dance, to celebrate. They drum the whole night, they dance, and this is a communal event. You could see similarities between raves nowadays. So they dance the whole night to achieve a state that is called lemwore, which could be translated with one-heartedness. So these community events are there to strengthen the community, but also to elevate each individual. And there they take quite tiny doses, not these large, heavily psychedelic doses. So you could say it's kind of a spiritual housekeeping, what they do. And we see that besides this initiatory use of Iboga, there is a broad range of traditional implications for ingesting low doses of Iboga. Summarized, the reasons are to gain energy, to heal, to strengthen, and to regulate emotionally in the direction of a brighter mood, and also to sharpen the senses and the consciousness. Later I will show that this is not superstition of Bushmen to be looked down upon, but has some rock-solid pharmacological background. So like a lot of these medicines from the forests, there is actually more to it than superstition. And this short excursion into the African tradition makes clear that low-dose regimes are basically as old as the use of Iboga itself. Nothing new, but something that was rediscovered and redefined by some courageous Westerner explorers, which then leads us to the history of low-dose regimes in the Western world, so-called civilized Western world. The first period of Western Iboga research reaches from 1860-something to 1905, during which the plant was discovered by Occidental explorers and then classified and researched. And then in 1901, Ibogaine was isolated as the main active alkaloid. One team who did this was a Swiss team, and the other was a Swiss-French collaboration. But then after a brief research in France, and also the recommendation to use the newly discovered alkaloid to treat various ailments such as neurasthenia, the sleeping sickness, and also to aid with convalescence in general, somehow the Iboga shrub fell into oblivion. But then, in 1939, a preparation called lambarene was launched in France. Lambarene was named in honor of the place where philanthropist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Dr. Albert Schweitzer lived and founded his jungle hospital. Here we see Dr. Albert Schweitzer with his close friend. It's the Parzival, it's his personal pelican. If you go nowadays to Lambarene and visit the hospital, they still keep a pelican in honor of Parzival. I think now it's Parzival III. Well, the medicine called Lambarene was produced until 1969, and it was based on 0.2 grams of Tabernante mani extract, which equals to round about 6 milligrams of Ibogaine. So it seems fair to say that Lambarene marks the starting point of Western microdosing of Ibogaine. There were other products following. Today one would say generics. They were called Hypertone and Dragé Nirdal, all in France. And the indications to take these products was depression, exhaustion, and also the wish to generally improve the immune system. But also athletes used it to enhance their performance. So especially mountain climbers liked to take tiny doses of Iboga. But then between 1967 and 1970, the World Health Assembly, which is the executive organ of the WHO, the World Health Organization, was urged by the United States to classify all psychedelics as dangerous, and subsequently all these products were taken off the market. But the real ignition in the Western world is marked by the discovery and open disclosure of the anti-addictive properties by Howard Lotzow in 1960s. Also then Claudio Naranjo, the famous proponent of Gestalt therapy and Club of Rome member, experimented with medium doses of Iboga in a range from 4 to 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. He even filed a patent in France in 1969 for the psychotherapeutic use of Iboga, but nothing really came out of this. And there is somewhat the rumor still around in the internet that Iboga is an MAO inhibitor. We now know for a fact that it's not, but this goes back to an assumption of Claudio. But basically, thanks to the efforts of Howard Lotzow and his colleagues Dana Beal and Bob Sisko, we now know of the potential of Ibogaine. Bob Sisko just recently died. Howard Lotzow is also dead since 2010, but Dana Beal is still rocking. So the sustained momentum of the Iboga microdosing in the West was basically ignited by the Iboga detox movement in the 80s and 90s. The idea was to prolong the afterglow. If you have a very high dose of Iboga, you, after the initial very intense experience, there is an afterglow which feels very nice, very pleasant. And after this afterglow wears off, people often had the issues of re-emerging or resurfacing cravings. And to counteract these cravings in the detox movement, it was usual to give tiny microdoses. So basically, this falls back to the first generation of the Iboga providers who observed that after the nor-ibogaine, the metabolite had worn off, these old habit patterns and routines came back, but this could be treated with microdoses. Yeah. 20 years ago, there was not so much experimentation with Iboga in the recreational psychonautic scene. Iboga was very little known outside of the detox scene, but then now, due to the psychedelic renaissance and the general emerging of plant medicines, Iboga is increasingly able to free itself from the stigma of being exclusively a junkie medicine. And more people actually realize the potential of this plant. So especially microdosing is an easier access for a broader demography of people. Now, having briefly touched the traditional and Western use of Iboga microdosing, I want to elaborate a bit the neuropharmacological backgrounds. So Iboga alkaloids are super unique, like really rare in their neuropharmacological profile. Common psychedelics like LSD, DMT, or including all forms of psilocybin, basically mediate their effects through the serotonergic neurotransmitter system. Most of them are, amongst others, 5-HT2A receptor agonists, meaning they imitate serotonin. They go instead of serotonin to the serotonin receptors, different subtypes of serotonin receptors. And then there are other compounds like ketamine, for example, which is an NMDA receptor agonist of the glutamate system, antagonist, sorry. And then there is the really strange salvinorin A, which mediates its effect via the kappa opiate receptor, which is already really strange. But then there's Ibogaine, and Ibogaine basically targets all of them mentioned before, plus some more. So one would say it's pharmacologically very diverse. First, a quick overview of what Ibogaine is doing, and then later what we can use it for. So Ibogaine is an 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C and 5-HTC receptor agonist, and furthermore, it binds to the serotonin transporter, so it acts as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. This is basically the mechanism of action how much antidepressants are working. Then Ibogaine targets the mu, the kappa, and the delta receptors, which are all opiate receptor subtypes. And then Ibogaine is a non-competitive NMDA antagonist, just like ketamine. So if you take higher doses of Iboga, you also feel this kind of dissociative aspect to it, which is also there with ketamine. And then it's targeting also the sigma-1 and sigma-2 receptors. The sigma-2 receptors are currently, there's a line of research of cancer treatment because some cancer cells overexpress sigma-2 receptors, and there's a line of research that looks at sigma-2 agonists to treat cancer. And then in the cholinergic system, Ibogaine is an agonist at the nicotinergic receptors and also an antagonist at the muscarine receptors. And then furthermore, on the dopamine system, it's a non-competitive dopamine antagonist, meaning it's a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And some other mechanisms of action are, it's a sodium ion channel agonist, then it binds and blocks to the hERG channel. This is the human ether agogo related gene channel. It's a potassium ion channel, which is mediating the repolarization of the cardiac potential of the heart. This is very important to help the heartbeat, and this is basically the problem why higher doses of Ibogaine can be lethal, because it prolongs the QT interval. With microdosing, this problem does not exist. The QT interval is not significantly prolonged with microdoses. Then it stimulates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls the reaction to stress, cortisol, and also regulates many body functions like mood and sexuality. And then other utmost interesting mechanisms of action, which I will elucidate later a bit, is the stimulation of the GDNF production in the brain, and it's the pharmacochaperoning of the dopamine transporter membrane protein. And furthermore, Ibogaine acts as or has pro-antioxidant and metabolic plasticity and energy economizing effects. So this level of neuropharmacological diversity is super unique in the psychedelic realm, and makes Ibogaine microdosing pretty interesting for a broad range of applications. So after this somewhat technical part, let's explore what this means. What does this imply for hacking our consciousness? What can we make out of this knowledge? So microdosing for depression and emotional imbalance. There are these stories of the pygmies, outstandingly happy pygmies, of Professor Fernandez, the dude with the ridiculous hat, and some others, and they give a hint. They convey the idea that there must be something to it. And then we now know that Ibogaine and noribogaine are effective as an SSRI, inhibiting the serotonin transporter, basically acting like the same mechanism of action like many antidepressants are working. So people who take tiny sub-perceptual doses of Iboga microdosing seem to have a bit brighter mood and are generally more stable in their emotions. So the tribes intuitively knew about this, and now it's basically backed by the research. For example, we had a guy who was severely depressed, and he tried several antidepressants over the course of the last few years, and nothing really seemed to help. And we gave him tiny microdoses, and a friend of him approached us then and asked, "I don't know what you have done with my friend, but it's the first time I see him smiling since 6 years." So there seems to be a really good effect, even with very low doses. Then microdosing as a stimulant, an energizer, and aphrodisiac. As mentioned before, there are these narratives about Iboga being a great stimulant, energizer, and aphrodisiac, suppressing hunger and thirst. And then also here, if we take a closer look at the pharmacological profile, we know Ibogaine as well as noribogaine inhibit the dopamine transporter, just like, for example, cocaine. And some of these effects are increased stamina, decreased appetite, as well as an increased self-esteem. But Iboga, being pharmacologically super unique and diverse, there is also another mechanism which could also add positively or have positive influence on this. The research of Roman Pascolin showed how Ibogaine improves the energetic metabolism of erythrocytes, the red blood cells. Furthermore, also has pro-antioxidative effects by stimulating the body's own defense system against the oxidative stress, and by this saving energy, which then could be used elsewhere. So there are some pharmacological backgrounds for these stories of increasing strength and stamina. We have good results, for example, with people who have chronic fatigue syndrome. Or also we had a male in his late 70s who told us how his libido came back, also with the physical manifestation of the libido every morning. And generally people feel or tend to feel more motivated with taking the microdoses of Iboga. But if you intend to use it as aphrodisiac, you should be pretty cautious. We had once a guy who took a higher dose, not necessarily a microdose, and I phoned him and asked how he feels, and he says generally he feels good, but he is in hospital with a penis fracture. So he got very maniac with his girlfriend. So if you intend to take higher doses, be very cautious, don't dose too high. Can make people a bit maniac. And then microdosing to tackle subtle addictions. So there is a neuropharmacological reason why especially the very perfidious nicotine addiction can be tackled with Ibogaine, because Ibogaine is this pretty strong nicotinergic receptor agonist. So Ibogaine physiologically basically decreases the urge for tobacco intake. We had a person who didn't want to stop smoking, who had no intention of decreasing his tobacco consumption, but said, okay, I'll take a tiny bit of Iboga. And it was a very small dose, subperceptual. And he just reduced his tobacco intake by half because the receptors were basically blocked. So he had conspicuously less desire to smoke. And people who actually have the intention to stop smoking can do so often with the help of Iboga microdosing. And then also besides these neuropharmacologically backed mechanisms of action, there are some other effects which are rather on the psychological side. So people try to tackle other minor addictions like caffeine addiction or sugar or binge eating with the microdosing of Iboga. And they report how their overall awareness, also the skill to reflect, increases. And subsequently, the ability to recognize the addictive thought structures and comprehend the underlying psychological patterns is increased or enhanced. So it seems to be possible to reprogram undesirable and unhealthy habit patterns gradually with microdosing. So people report how they started to be more honest with themselves and were able to face unpleasant truth and unwanted emotions better, and by this could analyze and work more effectively on themselves. For example, we had a young lady and we gave her Iboga microdosing, and with the microdosing she realized how she was always very mean to herself, like not accepting herself. Basically, she got aware of her auto-aggression and her self-denial. And since these subconscious routines became more conscious to her, she could establish a more loving or more nice relationship with herself without the hateful, downgrading inner dialogue. So we see now, since how these ancient traditions, which use Iboga to hack their consciousness, are somehow backed by neuroscience. But currently, the most interesting implication or application for us is the possibility to treat Parkinson's disease. So, Ibogaine has neuroprotective or neurorestorative properties. To explain this, a short excursion. In 1991, a small peptide, an amino acid called GDNF was discovered. It's called glial cell line-derived neurotrophic factor. And it has been shown that GDNF increases the growth, the survival, the functioning, and the differentiation, as well as the sprouting of dopamine neurons. And this has been shown in animal models first, and then also in human trials. And this is particularly interesting to treat Parkinson's disease, because Parkinson's basically degenerate the dopamine neurons. To this day, it has been a major challenge to bring GDNF into the areas of the brain where it is needed for Parkinson's, the substantia nigra and the striatum. And there have been trials bringing GDNF in the brain with brain infusion, with direct brain infusion. But this is a quite dangerous surgery, and the tubes into the brain are neither a appealing fun procedure nor an easily applicable treatment. And then other approaches tried to use genetically modified progenitors to deliver GDNF into the brain. So far, none of these routes have proven satisfactory. And then there is Ibogaine. Ibogaine has been shown to globally stimulate the production of GDNF in the brain when taken orally. Also, now a new study from the team from Montevideo around Ignacio Carrera also shows how GDNF and BDNF production is stimulated in the brain if Ibogaine is taken orally. So we now know that Ibogaine stimulates the production of GDNF in the brain, which is already really good for Parkinson patients. But then Ibogaine, being kind of a neuropharmacological freak, does even more. And to explain this, also again a little excursion. In the old days, there were people called chaperones. Chaperones were persons who oversaw young, noble people, that they don't behave socially unacceptable, Anstandsdamen, so that young, noble ladies don't lose their virginity or something like this. And this also exists in the pharmacology, not necessarily the nobility, but the chaperones. And they're called pharmacochaperones, pharmacological chaperones. And pharmacochaperones are molecules which serve as a scaffold for otherwise misfolded mutant proteins to root and to fold correctly within the cell. So we have this new line of research highlighting how pharmacological chaperones can be used to rescue misfolded proteins. And funny enough, Ibogaine and noribogaine act as a pharmacochaperone specifically for the folding deficient dopamine transporter mutant protein, which gives rise to Parkinsonism. So this makes Ibogaine even more interesting for Parkinson patients. But Ibogaine does not stop here. It seems to have kind of a love affair in this direction of pharmacological mechanism of action. So it has been shown how Ibogaine increases the dopamine transporter surface expression. In this trial also methylphenidate and cocaine were also tested. They didn't have this effect. Specifically Ibogaine nor Ibogaine have this effect. So there is this whole cascade of pharmacological implications why Ibogaine should or could help with Parkinson disease. So we tested this. And I can't go into full detail today because we are currently still finishing the paper on this. But the results are promising, actually so promising that we are setting up a phase 2 clinical trial. And once the paper is through peer review and published, you will be able to read it. But a short sneak preview for you today. We used several assessment tools to measure the severity of the Parkinson's. So we did this assessment at the beginning of the trail, at the baseline, in the middle, and at the end. And we used the UPDRS, which is the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, which is an international accredited assessment tools for the severity of Parkinson's. And we used the PDQ-39, which is the Parkinson's questionnaire, which addresses more the subjective quality of life of the Parkinson patients. And then we used the Parkinson's Disease Sleep Scale, PDSS, and the Parkinson's Disease Fatigue Scale. The fatigue scale measures more how people feel while their waking hours. Are they tired? Do they feel exhausted? And the Parkinson's disease sleep scale assesses the quality of sleep while they are actually sleeping. And on top of these 4 Parkinson-specific assessment tools, we used also the Beck's depression inventory, revision number 2. So today I will just show the scores of 2 assessments of 2 patients. And generally with these assessment tools, the higher the score, the more severe the symptoms. This means the lower the score, the better the quality of life. And here on the left side, we see the UPDRS, and this is an improvement. This is a very significant improvement of nearly 30 to 50%. So the people had measurably less Parkinson's symptoms. It's a great improvement of their life. Also, in the Beck's depression inventory, we see an improvement of 30 to 50% of their symptoms. So they not just had less physiological problems and were able to walk, but also felt much more happy. So we had, for example, a client, she couldn't, there are things called freezes or off phases where Parkinson patients just can't move. And she had off phases of up to 8 hours a day, and we got it down to half an hour a day. So she basically got her full motoric capabilities back, which makes her really happy. So there might be interrelated, the Beck's depression inventory, since if you walk better or are able to walk, you feel better and more happy. So we developed this special protocol with the help of some pretty courageous Parkinson patient volunteers who helped us on this. If I say we, in this case, it's the Global Iboga Therapy Alliance in collaboration with the Beckley Foundation. And I can't go into more details about the study till the paper is published, but I want to give you a short impression with the interview of the mother of one of our Parkinson clients.
Hi, your post mother. Can you describe to me how he was 2 years or 1 year ago before he took the Iboga?
He was mostly lying on his bed. He had several attacks, 16 hours a day, the attacks. So he has no life at all. And we were talking about euthanasia. Do you say that? Even with the doctor, but he had to wait for his deep brain stimulation. He got it in the Corona time because he tried to kill himself, and they got permission to do the deep brain stimulation. After that, it went better with the attacks, but he lays in his bed for a year after that. And he got Iboga, and the first, we didn't see a thing until he got the Iboga route in half March, I think. And then it went very rapidly. Each week you could see the difference. And now he walks and he cycles, and it's, if the person said if there were they thought if there was a God, I believe in him now. So was the difference. It was huge in a very short time. In June he couldn't do 3 steps, but he now walks. It's unbelievable. Nobody thought it was going this way. Dus it was so.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
I hope that's me begin.
This is
I hope
perfect.
that you understand me.
So the mother told me that he still takes Iboga now, and he sometimes takes a bit more Iboga than we intended him to take, and he makes him a bit maniac. But basically, his family enjoys much more him being a bit maniac, dancing around in the house, than him lying in a nursing home, unable to commit suicide and asking the doctors to kill him. So there is a massive improvement. So if there are people here who either have Parkinson's or know persons who have Parkinson's disease, or people who are willing to support this phase 2 clinical trial, feel free to get in touch. And if you have any questions now, I am here and happy to answer them. And thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tobias, for this multifaceted talk. There is hope on the Ibogaine front, so I hope we will see more research in the next couple of years, also highlighting the therapeutic benefits. So we open the space